I'm Perky Beisel, one of the leaders of the Texas chapter of the Association for Gravestone Studies. We're so glad that you're able to join us today on this virtual field trip to a few of our Texas cemeteries. We're going to be traveling along the El Camino Real de los Tejas, a historic road through deep East Texas, the Piney Woods. My apologies to everybody else in this huge state of Texas that we don't get to show off your cemeteries as well. Everybody, we have a lot of great things in store. I hope you enjoy this little taste of Texas's historic cemeteries. We are here at Caddo Mound State Historic Site. Behind me is one mound of many in what was a large burial complex for the Caddo Indians. This was a large village area. The Caddo were the largest tribe in this area when the Spanish arrived. They built these mounds over a course of about 700 years, from 600 to 1300 AD. This mound behind me was about 20 feet tall, 90 feet in diameter. It held 90 individuals in 30 different burial pits. The Caddo Indians were the reason the Spanish were coming up here to East Texas, and these burial mounds are what remains of these historic Caddo. Welcome to historic Oak Grove Cemetery here in Nacogdoches, Texas. This cemetery was established in 1834 and originally named the American Cemetery. Its name was changed later in the century. This is a large city cemetery that is still in use, and as a result of that, we have a large variety of stones, different materials, types, motifs, and shapes. We're also the final resting place of several notable individuals in the Texas Revolution and early Texas history. We also have recently completed a new interpretive tour, and we'll show you a little of that as well. As a result, Oak Grove is a centerpiece of historic preservation and tourism here in Nacogdoches, Texas. I'm standing here at one of our 8 recently installed interpretive panels about those buried here at historic Oak Grove Cemetery. This one highlights some of our notable women, including Mary Palmer Dana Schindler, whose gravestone includes words to her hymn, "Flee as a Bird." We also have Helen Vinson, who is a notable 1930s movie star, and Carl Wilson Baker, who was a poet and nominated for the Pulitzer Prize in 1931. Oscar Lemon Holmes is a great example of Americans coming to the Republic of Texas and becoming all things Texan. He arrived in the early 1830s, worked a series of odd jobs, and eventually became the county clerk. He never married, but he amassed a fortune through land sales and other deeds. And you can see here from the excerpt of his will that he left all of that money to Texans who had fought in the Civil War. I'm standing here at the granite obelisk for Thomas J. Rusk. Thomas J. Rusk was one of 4 Texas signers buried here in Oak Grove Cemetery. Rusk, like his contemporaries, came to Texas first when it was Spanish and then Mexican territory. He was very involved in all aspects of the Republic time period, and then eventually was one of the first U.S. senators to represent Texas. Unfortunately, he was in Washington when he received word that his wife, Mary, was quite ill. He rushed back to Nacogdoches as quickly as he could. However, she died before he arrived. It's clear he was quite heartbroken, and over a year after her death, he committed suicide. And in 1936, the state of Texas erected this obelisk at his gravesite as part of the Texas Centennial Project. We are here at the Selma Rourke Cemetery in Cherokee County, and it is located along El Camino Real de los Tejas. This is the road that stretched from the southern border with Mexico up to what was the French border in Natchitoches, Louisiana. This is the route by which the Spanish came north to East Texas and the Americans came west from Louisiana. And the Selman family, like many others, claimed land along the El Camino Real, and that's in the lower swells down below behind me. There are actual ruts from that historic trail there. Today's highway parallels this historic transportation route. In deep East Texas, we see a lot of different ways to protect burial sites from cattle, whether it's these concrete body covers or these large grave surrounds of the native iron ore. And that's because the Spanish, when they came up, they had driven with their expeditions large herds of cattle that they then released into the piney woods. And those cattle multiplied over the centuries. So this large marble multi-pieced pedestal here capped with a drapery and a closed book was for Mrs. Selman, who was born in Franklin County, Tennessee in 1832 and died here in Cherokee County in 1910. These Texas granite markers are a great example of Texas celebrating its history while promoting its granite industry. And in 1936, the state of Texas erected thousands of these across the state to honor the Texas Revolution, the people and the events and the places that were involved in that event. Selman Rourke Cemetery has a nice selection of these native iron ore, or ironstone as it's called, stone enclosures of early burial sites. This is historic Glenwood Cemetery, the old city cemetery of Crockett, Texas. Crockett is the county seat of Houston County, the first county established in the Republic of Texas in 1837. This cemetery was established shortly thereafter. The original old section, or the first half, is the southern side, and like many other cemeteries of its time period in this area, it was segregated into black and white sections. The original fencing that delineated those sections is no longer standing, but you can see that if you tour the cemetery. There are lots of notable early Texans buried here, and as a result, this cemetery has many historic markers throughout its grounds on both the north and south halves. So this is the northern half of Glenwood Cemetery. It's the newer half that opened in 1870. And this area is still in use by family members who long ago purchased plots. You'll see behind me, this is a really remarkable metal arbor, a very different take on the more common cemetery fencing. And this is probably one of the most unique aspects of this half of Glenwood Cemetery. And that we don't have any other examples like this here in East Texas. The metalwork is really remarkable, and the fact that it has remained in such good condition since 1883 is just wonderful. This Woodman of the World example here on Jones is typical of the headstones that are not in stump form but still have the Woodman of the World symbol. On this Davis headstone here, we see another variety of the Woodman of the World, in this case upright stumps, a stack of logs, and a lower base of logs. So we are used to seeing all different types of Woodman of the World markers. This zinc marker for the Sphinx family is, while typical in other parts of the country, quite unusual for Deep East Texas. This is the only one we have found in our rural cemeteries. Otherwise, we would have to go up to Shreveport, Louisiana to find any notable collection of them. Glenwood Cemetery has a large selection of marble markers in traditional styles and shapes. This angel carrying away the infant is a nice example of the high quality. Unfortunately, most are not signed. Presumably, they came in through Galveston or Shreveport. This large marble obelisk is a nice example of the combination of fraternal and social organization symbols, as well as the migration to Texas. Florence Arledge came from Tennessee, and her husband had been born in Alabama. The Masons are really well represented in East Texas. The first lodge to be established was in San Augustine, the second lodge in Nacogdoches, and they continued westward along the El Camino Real to places like here in Crockett, where there's several past Grand Masters. This marble truncated obelisk is really interesting. It has the open book, and on the one side it has a lamb, and on the other side it has the 3-link chain, also the all-seeing eye. That is part of the Masonic symbol. So they're combining the 3 links with the Masonic all-seeing eye, and you can see just to the bottom the rays of that sun coming out. What's so interesting about this one, this is for Isaac Peacock, who was born in Kent County, Maryland, and he died here in Crockett, quote, by the hands of an assassin on the 11th of March, 1859. Welcome to Pierce Chapel Cemetery here in Nacogdoches County. This is a scraped earth or a bare earth cemetery, and this cemetery, these burials around me date back as early as the 1870s. However, this practice continues today. Each year, family members and the cemetery management come in and scrape up the dirt and gravel to form these mounds over the burials, and this helps preserve the site, as well as intentionally ensuring that there is no grass. By not having a grass-covered cemetery, you discourage livestock and wild animals from coming in, and it also, I've also been told, makes it better to prevent snakes, because you don't have the snake sighting, and we do have a lot here in Deep East Texas. So this is a different approach to cemetery management that we don't see a lot, but this is a very good example. This is Sand Hill Cemetery, and it is a community cemetery. We're here for quite a few different reasons. First and foremost, this is an African American cemetery that was established as part of what we call freedom colonies here in Texas. After the end of the Civil War and emancipation, community members often obtained land in the area that they lived prior to the Civil War, and they established these rural, agricultural-based communities. And so as these peoples gathered together and created their lives, of course the one thing they had to have was a cemetery. And so there's been a lot of work in the last several decades to identify and document the history of these freedom colonies. And Sand Hill is one of them, and the family members and the descendants of those early individuals have done a lot of work here at this cemetery to preserve that history. These low monuments here for the Garners are very typical of what you see in deep East Texas African American cemeteries. The full-length body covers in the shape of coffins with handles not only provide a clear indication of the burial site, but also provide protection from trees and livestock. This small marble headstone for Harriet Brown is typical for the area, but what is untypical is that her photograph is still in such wonderful condition. Unfortunately, many have fallen or been vandalized over the years. Here at Sand Hill Cemetery, we have a really great example of what a small community-based volunteer management can do to preserve and protect a cemetery. They have several different issues that they have been dealing with successfully. It is a rolling topography, so it induces tilting and leaning of the headstones. It also is a sand hill, that's why it has its name, and as such, many of the gravestones over the years had sunken and been covered. And so they have worked to re-identify these and reset them. In addition, there were many unmarked graves, and unfortunately, like many small rural cemeteries, not lots of cemetery burial records. And so using GPR, ground-penetrating radar technology, they were able to identify many of these previously unknown burials. And afterwards, they commissioned a series of small granite headstone markers that say unknown in order to mark these burials. This bronze military marker for Jake Ferguson is a good example of how the managers here at Sand Hill are dealing with their topography and the soil. In this case, they took the bronze and built a oversized large concrete base in order to ensure that the bronze didn't sink and was covered. They've had this problem quite a few times. Here you can see that it is tilting because of the hillside and the sand shifting underneath, but luckily there's plenty of time to reset it because of the large concrete base. Sand Hill Cemetery has a very large collection of gravestones made by a yet unidentified maker who worked in the Nacogdoches County and possibly surrounding counties. This gentleman used very clear forms to shape his concrete markers and had a set of stamps to impress the names and dates. And when you look at the 2s and the 3s, there's an extra little curly Q there that is quite distinctive. Isabel Menifee's gravestone here
has the very characteristic bow and the 2 and the 3 and the 5 with the extra swirls. Here on Rose's headstone, we see the same shape, we see the same ribbon or garland at the top, but we also see the addition of another common symbol this maker utilized, which was this series of rosettes stamped along the upper margin. Vernio Curl's gravestone is a good example of some of the other decorative motifs used by this gravestone maker, the heart, and then the series of flowers blooming from the base. Vernio's footstone has a C and the matching heart, and that's a hallmark of this gravestone maker. This locally made headstone for DA is an example of another gravestone maker found here in Sand Hill and elsewhere who has this distinctive triangular shape, the impressed circles, and then these textured lines. We found less of these in the area, but clearly somebody who was making these regularly. So this is Enon Cemetery in the midst of the piney woods. It's a typical small community cemetery of this area. Why we picked it is it has a nice diversity of different gravestone materials and manufacturing techniques. It's also typical for the environment in which it sits, and its most unique feature is its very intact historic tabernacle. And the tabernacle replaced an older church building that burned, but this tabernacle, while no longer used for regular church services, now functions as a homecoming pavilion. And in this area, homecomings happen usually during the summer. The family and relatives and community gather to join together, celebrate those in the cemetery, and clean up the cemetery. And this pavilion is one of the oldest we have in the region, the most well preserved. And also on the corner posts you can still see the marks of the wire that had to be installed to keep the cattle out, because until after the 1970s, when the laws changed, cattle were allowed to roam freely through the woods. And so it gives you a sense of the rural location of the cemetery. This is a very typical gravestone of our area here. While not exclusive to Texas, very popular in East Texas. It's a Woodman of the World memorial. You can always tell them from the front of a cemetery. This is a standard height for our area. The large stump, and then in this case, the shield of the member. The Woodman of the World was an insurance society begun in Omaha, Nebraska, and it was generally open to everyone. However, doctors, lawyers, and other wealthy individuals were not allowed to purchase memberships when it was begun. Initially, one of the benefits was to receive a gravestone at the time of your death. Those benefits were eventually ended. However, this probably was one of those. It's still fairly early. This gentleman did pass away in December of 1918. You also see the typical, not only the round shield, the Woodman of the World Memorial with the cut off stump here, this shield motif with the name and epitaph are very typical. The base is 2 logs going sideways, the calla lily at the bottom, and then the vines coming around. This is a more simple version, but we do have them all over. One misconception we have a lot around here is that this is only for timber workers because of the name of the organization. But it was a nationwide organization. It still exists, and we actually have Woodman of the World offices still here in East Texas. This is a large collection of petrified wood markers. There's no surviving inscriptions. However, the petrified wood is found, especially in this part of East Texas, in the local stream bed. So it is popular in these smaller, older, rural cemeteries, but this cemetery has more than most. This is historic Zion Hill Cemetery, a historic African American cemetery in Nacogdoches, Texas. It is also part of the Zion Hill National Register Historic District. This cemetery, while small, has a nice selection of marble, granite, vernacular concrete headstones, as well as a Mosaic Templars headstone. The Mosaic Templars of America was an African American fraternal organization established in 1883 in Little Rock, Arkansas, and it grew rapidly, especially into Louisiana, Oklahoma, and here in Texas. And the benefits included life insurance, health insurance. For us, what's most important is that they could receive a gravestone that was carved to the specifications of the Mosaic Templars. And so the key characteristics are this slanted top that is cut at an angle, so you can always see them in a cemetery. And then the central element is an orbis, a snake eating its tail, surrounding an MTA and the 3V for the 3 virtues. And then you'll have the name of the deceased, usually a birth and death date, and then at the bottom, an indication of which lodge they were a member of. And so these African American fraternal life insurance benefit gravestones are a really great way to track individuals as they moved around the country, and the records of the organization still exist in Little Rock.